They kicked the dog in front of her. Then she did something no one expected. She never spoke a word. Not since the night flames devoured her childhood home, along with everything she'd ever known. But when that Whitman boy kicked her only friend, a battle-scarred German shepherd who never left her side, something inside 11-year-old Abigail Sullivan shattered. In front of the entire Memorial Day crowd, this silent child did something that stunned everyone who had spent a year looking right through her. The lemonade stand went quiet. The carousel music seemed to fade. And in that moment, as her loyal protector whimpered at her feet, Abby found the voice that trauma had stolen. What followed would change not just one small Georgia town, but break hearts and heal souls across America. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. In the small town of Oak Ridge, Georgia, where pine trees whispered secrets and everyone knew everyone's business, there lived a little girl named Abigail Sullivan who hadn't spoken a single word in over a year. Not a whisper, not a hum, nothing. The silence wasn't just strange, it was haunting. Most folks chalked it up to the fire, the one that took her parents, her home, and every ounce of safety she once knew. After the tragedy, Abby moved in with Frank Thompson, a widowed Navy SEAL veteran whose grief lived behind his tired eyes and beneath his calloused hands. He was a man who fixed things, built things, but even he knew some things were just too broken to repair. And at first, Abby seemed like one of those things. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat drawing, always drawing dark lines on paper that looked like smoke and shadows. Frank didn't push. He didn't have the energy for therapy appointments or awkward small talk. He made her warm meals, fixed the creaky stairs, and let her exist in the silence she clung to. It was a quiet house, and most days it felt like two ghosts just circling each other, bound by a promise Frank had made to Abby's father years ago when they served together. "If anything happens to me, look after my little girl." The sprawling Thompson property sat on the outskirts of town, an old farmhouse with weathered white paint and a wraparound porch that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was safe, at least until Tyler Whitman and his development company set their sights on it. The land was prime real estate for the new shopping center that would bring Oak Ridge into the 21st century, as Tyler liked to say at town meetings. But Frank wouldn't sell, not when the land was meant to be Abby's inheritance someday. Meanwhile, Abby moved through her days like a ghost. At Oak Ridge Elementary, she was the girl everyone talked about but nobody really saw. Teachers tried their best, but how do you reach a child who won't speak? How do you protect a girl who won't tell you when she's hurting? And she was hurting, especially when Bryce Whitman, Tyler's son, made it his mission to remind her just how different she was from everyone else. "What's wrong, mute girl? Cat got your tongue?" he'd whisper as she passed in the hallway, flanked by his friends who snickered on cue. "My dad says your parents should have had better insurance. Guess they weren't that smart, huh?" Abby would just lower her eyes and walk faster, clutching her sketchbook tighter against her chest. The world had become a series of threats to navigate, of voices to tune out, of memories to bury. Until one stormy night when everything changed, the night Valor came into their lives and taught a silent girl how to roar. The thunderstorm rolled in like an old enemy, lightning cracking through the sky, wind howling through the shutters of Frank's farmhouse. It was the kind of Georgia storm that made the air feel heavy with electricity and memory. Frank was out in the shed gathering tools when he heard the softest sound beneath the porch, a whimper, barely audible beneath the rain's percussion. He assumed it was the wind until he leaned down and saw a pair of terrified eyes glowing in the dark. A German shepherd, ribs showing through matted fur, limping, soaked to the bone, and shaking like a leaf. No tag, no collar, just survival and pain in dog form. Frank opened the screen door, shaking his head. "Well, ain't this just my luck?" he muttered, not unkindly. He called for Abby, but received no answer. No surprise there. But when he led the trembling dog into the kitchen, something extraordinary happened. The moment Abby saw the dog from her perch at the kitchen table, her feet moved faster than Frank had ever seen. She didn't hesitate, walked straight into the kitchen, dropped to her knees, and wrapped her arms around the trembling animal like she'd known him her whole life. No words, just that silent, desperate hug, and Frank knew in that moment this wasn't just a stray. This was her stray, Scout. That's the name she wrote on the first bowl of food she slid across the floor. All capitals, uneven letters, but clear as day. Frank couldn't remember the last time she'd written anything besides those dark, smoky drawings. "Scout, huh?" Frank said, watching the dog sniff cautiously at the food before devouring it. "Well, I suppose we could call the shelter in the morning." Abby's head snapped up, her eyes filled with a fear so raw it stopped Frank mid-sentence. She shook her head fiercely, then grabbed her sketchbook, scribbling something with urgent strokes. When she held it up, Frank read, "Valor." The new name was underlined 3 times. "Valor," Frank said, testing the word. The dog's ears perked up slightly. "That's a soldier's name, a hero's name." Something about the way the dog carried himself, even injured, reminded Frank of the military working dogs he'd served alongside. There was a discipline there, a watchfulness behind the fear. From that day forward, Valor slept outside Abby's bedroom door, followed her everywhere, and waited patiently by the table every mealtime. He even sat beside her as she drew, like he understood every line on the page. Slowly, things changed. Abby stopped flinching at loud sounds. She began walking without watching over her shoulder, and when Valor barked at shadows, she smiled like he was chasing off her nightmares. Frank noticed more than he let on. He saw how her drawings changed. No more smoke and shadows. Now there were trees, a girl, and always, always a dog beside her. Still not a word from Abby, not a single sound, but Frank swore the silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows, Frank found Valor limping slightly, favoring his back right leg. When he examined the paw, he found it had been cut by something sharp. As he cleaned the wound, the dog didn't flinch or growl, just watched Frank with those intelligent eyes. "You've been trained, haven't you, boy?" Frank murmured, noticing how the dog held perfectly still during treatment. "Military, police. Someone spent a lot of time with you." He wrapped the paw carefully and patted the dog's head. "Where'd you come from, Valor? Who lost you?" The dog just blinked, as if to say those secrets weren't his to share. That night, Frank made some calls to old military connections, asking about missing service dogs. No leads came back, but his friend at the VA mentioned something interesting, a therapy program using former service dogs to help veterans with PTSD. "Dogs know trauma when they see it," his friend said. "They speak the language of the wounded." And Valor certainly seemed to speak Abby's language. When nightmares woke her screaming, the dog was there before Frank could reach her room, pressing his warm body against hers until the trembling stopped. When thunder, which had terrified her since the night of the fire, rumbled through the sky, Valor would place his head in her lap, his steady presence an anchor in the storm. "My grandma used to say that God sometimes sends angels in strange packages." Mrs. Kellerman, the elderly neighbor who brought casseroles once a week, remarked one day as she watched Abby and Valor in the yard. "I think that dog might be hers." Frank wasn't one for such sentiments, but even he couldn't deny the change in Abby. She'd started making eye contact again. And she'd begun leaving small notes around the house, requests for apple juice, thank yous for dinner, questions about Valor's favorite foods. Baby steps, but steps nonetheless. One Saturday morning, Frank found Abby sitting on the porch steps, Valor at her side, watching the sunrise turn the sky pink and gold. Without thinking, he snapped a photo with his old phone. When he looked at it later, he realized it was the first time he'd seen her face in profile since she'd come to live with him. She was always looking down or away. But there she was, face lifted to the light, one hand buried in Valor's fur. Progress, he thought. Not healing, not yet, but progress. Then came the first day of school after spring break, and with it, trouble. Frank drove Abby to Oak Ridge Elementary as usual, Valor sitting protectively beside her in the back seat of his pickup. The arrangement had been hard-won. A doctor's note declaring Valor an emotional support animal, a meeting with the reluctant principal, paperwork signed in triplicate. But it had been worth every bureaucratic hurdle to see Abby walk through those school doors with something like confidence, Valor trotting beside her with his red support animal vest. "Remember, he stays with you except during gym and lunch," Frank reminded her as he parked. "And if anyone gives you trouble," Abby nodded, patting the small notebook in her pocket, her way of communicating if needed. She reached for Valor's leash, but Frank gently caught her arm. "Abby," he said, his voice softening, "you're doing real good. Your parents would be proud of you. I know I am." Something flickered across her face. Pain, gratitude, he couldn't tell. She gave his hand a quick squeeze before sliding out of the truck, Valor jumping down after her. Frank watched them walk away, the small girl in her vigilant shadow, and wondered, not for the first time, what horrors she had witnessed the night of the fire. What memories kept her words locked inside. What Frank didn't see was Bryce Whitman watching from across the schoolyard, his young face twisting with the particular cruelty that comes from being the son of the most powerful man in a small town, a boy who'd never heard the word no in his life. "So the freak brought her mutt back to school," Bryce said to his friends, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "Guess they'll let anything in here these days." But Abby walked past without acknowledging him, Valor close at her side, and that, perhaps, was Bryce's first mistake, being ignored by the very person he was trying to hurt. The second mistake would come later, and it would change everything. The first signs of trouble appeared 3 weeks after Valor became a fixture at Oak Ridge Elementary. Frank noticed it when Abby climbed into his truck after school, her face paler than usual, her hand clutching Valor's fur with white-knuckled intensity. The German shepherd seemed on high alert, ears forward, eyes scanning constantly, a low rumble occasionally vibrating in his chest. "Everything okay at school today?" Frank asked, casually, watching her in the rearview mirror. Abby nodded, but her eyes told a different story. That evening, while she was in the shower, Frank checked Valor over, something he'd made a habit of doing, given the dog's mysterious past and tendency to place himself between Abby and any perceived threat. That's when he found it, a small patch of fur missing behind Valor's left ear, the skin beneath scraped raw. "What happened here, boy?" Frank murmured, gently examining the wound. Valor whined softly, turning his head to look toward Abby's room. The next morning, Frank dropped Abby off a little earlier than usual and made his way to Principal Gardner's office. Martha Gardner was a stern woman with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a tight bun, the kind of administrator who ran her school by the book. No exceptions, no excuses. "Mr. Thompson," she said, not looking up from her paperwork, "what can I do for you this morning?" "I need to know if something's happening with Abby at school," Frank said, settling his weathered frame into the chair across from her desk. "Valor was injured yesterday. Nothing serious, but it wasn't an accident." Principal Gardner sighed, finally meeting his eyes. "Mr. Thompson, we've had this conversation before. The arrangement allowing Abigail to bring her dog to school is already stretching district policy to its limits." "That dog is the only reason she's functioning at all," Frank countered, keeping his voice level, despite the frustration building in his chest. "If someone's hurting him, "No one has reported any incidents involving Abigail or her dog," Principal Gardner interrupted, "and without specific information, there's little I can do." Frank leaned forward. "Martha, we've known each other 20 years. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking you to keep an eye out. That girl's been through enough." Something softened in the principal's expression. "Frank, I understand your concern. Truly. But you know as well as I do whose son sits at the center of most of the trouble in this school. And you know whose name is on the new gymnasium we're breaking ground for next month. Tyler Whitman. Of course. The man who wanted Frank's land, whose son seemed to have inherited his father's sense of entitlement. So that's it. The Whitman boy gets a free pass to torment a traumatized child because his daddy writes big checks?" Principal Gardner's lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't say that." "I'll speak with Bryce's teachers, ask them to be vigilant, but without evidence, without Abigail telling us what happened." "She doesn't speak," Frank said, the words sharp with frustration. "Then perhaps it's time to consider whether mainstream schooling is the right environment for her," Gardner replied, her tone gentle but firm. "There are excellent facilities for children with special needs." Frank stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Abby doesn't have special needs. She has trauma. There's a difference." He headed for the door, then paused. "Just do what you can, Martha. Please." Over the next few days, Frank watched Abby carefully. She seemed more withdrawn, spending long hours with Valor in the backyard or curled up on her bed with her sketchbook. One afternoon, when she fell asleep on the couch, Frank gently slid the sketchbook from her lap. What he saw made his blood run cold. The drawings had changed again. No more peaceful scenes of a girl and her dog. Now there was a dark figure looming over Valor, the dog's form small and crouched. In another sketch, the girl, clearly Abby, stood with something like lightning coming from her hands, directed at the shadow figure. And in the corner of one page, written in jagged capital letters, Bryce. Frank closed the sketchbook and returned it to Abby's side. That night, after she went to bed, he made a phone call to an old friend at the sheriff's office. "I need advice, Jim, not official action," Frank explained after outlining the situation. "I can't prove anything yet. Without the girl speaking up or an adult witness, there's not much to be done officially," Jim confirmed. "But unofficially, document everything. Take pictures of any injuries to the dog. Keep copies of Abby's drawings, and maybe invest in one of those small voice recorders she can keep in her pocket. Georgia's a one-party consent state. If she records Bryce threatening her or the dog, that's admissible." It was good advice, but Frank never got the chance to implement it. The very next day, everything changed. He knew something was wrong the moment he pulled up to the school. Abby wasn't waiting in their usual spot by the flagpole. Instead, she was huddled on a bench near the side entrance, Valor pressing against her legs, his posture rigid and alert. As Frank approached, he could see Abby was trembling. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling in front of her. Abby didn't respond, just buried her face in Valor's fur. The dog turned to look at Frank, and that's when he saw it. A thin trail of blood running from Valor's mouth, staining his golden-brown fur. "Who did this?" Frank demanded, his voice low and dangerous. When Abby didn't respond, he gently tilted her chin up. "Abby, I need to know. Was it Bryce?" Her eyes, wide and brimming with tears, told him everything. Frank helped her to her feet and marched toward the administration building, Valor limping slightly beside them. This time he didn't bother with appointments or protocols. He pushed straight into Principal Gardner's office, Abby and Valor in tow. "This ends today," he announced, pointing to Valor's bloodied muzzle. "Someone hit this dog hard enough to cut his mouth, and we both know who it was." Principal Gardner stared at Valor, her professional composure momentarily slipping. "Mr. Thompson, I understand your anger, but no more buts. That boy has been terrorizing Abby for weeks. Now he's moved on to physically abusing her support animal. Where is he? I want him in this office now with his father." "Frank, please lower your voice," Gardner urged, eyeing Abby, who was pressed against Valor, her face pale. "I'll handle this through the proper channels." "The proper channels haven't done a damn thing so far," Frank retorted. "That dog is the only reason Abby's made any progress at all. And I'm not going to stand by while some spoiled brat destroys that because his daddy thinks he's untouchable." The door opened behind them, and Jim Russell, Frank's friend from the sheriff's office, stepped in. "Got a call about a disturbance," he said, nodding to Frank. "Everything okay in here?" Principal Gardner stood, straightening her blazer. "Deputy Russell, this is a school matter that we're handling internally." "Assault isn't a school matter," Frank interrupted, "and neither is animal cruelty." Jim's eyes moved to Valor, noting the blood. "That what this is about?" Before anyone could answer, Tyler Whitman strode into the office, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the institutional beige of the school walls. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded. "I was in the middle of a conference call when I got your message, Martha." Principal Gardner winced. "Mr. Whitman, thank you for coming so quickly." "There's been an incident involving Bryce. Bryce hit my dog." Abby's voice, small but clear, cut through the room like a knife. Everyone froze. Frank turned slowly to stare at Abby, who had stepped forward, one hand still buried in Valor's fur. It was the first time he'd heard her speak since the night she came to live with him, her voice rusty from disuse but unmistakable. "He hit Valor because I wouldn't give him my lunch money," she continued, each word careful and deliberate. "He's been doing it for weeks, pushing me, throwing things at Valor when teachers aren't looking." The silence in the room was absolute. Frank felt a surge of emotions so powerful he could barely breathe. Pride, sorrow, rage, hope, all tangled together in his chest. Tyler Whitman recovered first. "That's ridiculous. My son would never—" "I have pictures," Abby said, pulling out her small notebook. She flipped it open to reveal not notes but photographs, shaky, child-taken photos of Bryce reaching for Valor, of a small rock being thrown, of the scraped skin behind Valor's ear. "I took them, with the disposable camera from art class." Frank stared at her in disbelief. All this time, while he'd been trying to protect her, Abby had been gathering evidence on her own. "I'd like to speak with Bryce," Deputy Russell said, his tone professional but his eyes hard. "Animal cruelty is a serious offense, even for a juvenile." "This is absurd," Tyler sputtered. "You're going to take the word of a mentally disturbed child." "I'm not disturbed," Abby interrupted, her voice stronger now. "I'm grieving. There's a difference." Frank felt a surge of fierce pride. Those were his exact words to Principal Gardner days earlier. "Grieving or not, you haven't spoken in a year," Tyler countered. "And now suddenly you're making accusations against my son." "This is clearly a bid for attention. Mr. Whitman," Deputy Russell cut in, "I suggest you consider your next words very carefully." Tyler's face flushed with anger. "Are you threatening me, Deputy? Do you know who I am in this town?" "I know exactly who you are," Russell replied calmly. "Just like I know that Georgia state law takes animal cruelty very seriously, regardless of who commits it or who their father is." The tension in the room was palpable. Principal Gardner looked like she might faint. Frank moved to stand beside Abby, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "This isn't over," Tyler said finally, pointing at Frank. "Not by a long shot. Keep that mutt away from my son." He turned on his heel and stormed out. In the silence that followed, Abby knelt beside Valor, gently examining his injured mouth. "He needs a vet," she said quietly. Frank nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. His little girl had found her voice again, not gradually, not hesitantly, but all at once, when it mattered most, when someone she loved was in danger. As they left the office, Deputy Russell fell into step beside them. "That was pretty brave," he told Abby. "Both taking those pictures and speaking up today." Abby looked up at him, her expression solemn. "Valor would do it for me," she said simply. "He's the brave one." And in that moment, Frank understood something profound about courage. Sometimes it wasn't about being fearless, but about being terrified and speaking anyway. Sometimes it wasn't about fighting your own battles, but standing up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. That night, after the vet had treated Valor's split lip and prescribed rest, Frank tucked Abby into bed. Valor lay on the floor beside her, his vigilant eyes following Frank's movements. "You did good today," Frank told her. "Real good." Abby nodded, her fingers absently stroking Valor's ear. I was scared," she admitted, her voice still unfamiliar to Frank's ears. "Being scared doesn't make you weak," Frank said. "Acting despite being scared, that's what makes you strong." She considered this for a moment. "Like Valor. He was scared of the thunder when he first came, but he still protected me." "Exactly like that." Abby was quiet for a long moment, then, "They're going to be mad at me, aren't they? Bryce and his dad." Frank couldn't lie to her. "Probably, but you've got me, Deputy Russell, and a very loyal dog on your side. We'll figure it out together." As he turned to leave, Abby's voice stopped him. "Frank, thank you for not giving up on me, for letting me be quiet until I was ready." The simple gratitude in her words nearly undid him. "I'll never give up on you, kiddo. Never." Later, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands, Frank watched the stars appear one by one in the Georgia sky. Something had shifted today, a corner turned, a battle won. But he knew enough about war to understand that one victory didn't end the conflict. Tyler Whitman wasn't a man who accepted defeat gracefully, and Frank had just very publicly challenged his authority. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time in a very long time, there was hope in the old farmhouse. A girl finding her voice, a dog healing from his wounds, and a man remembering what it felt like to fight for something that mattered. Word spread through Oak Ridge like wildfire. "Did you hear? The Sullivan girl spoke, stood right up to Tyler Whitman himself." The story grew with each telling, in the church pews on Sunday morning, across checkout counters at Mason's Grocery, between booths at the Bluebird Diner. By Monday, it seemed the entire town had taken sides. For Abby, the newfound attention was overwhelming. Words came easier now, but they still felt strange in her mouth, like tools she'd forgotten how to use properly. She spoke in short, careful sentences, mostly to Frank and Valor. At school, the other children watched her with a mixture of curiosity and awe, as if she might perform another miracle at any moment. "Is it true you yelled at Mr. Whitman?" asked Lily Parker, a freckle-faced girl who had never spoken to Abby before. "No," Abby replied quietly, stroking Valor's head. "I just told the truth." The truth, as it turned out, had consequences. Bryce Whitman received a 3-day suspension, a punishment that seemed to satisfy no one. Those who sided with the Whitmans thought it excessive for boyish mischief. Those who stood with Abby and Frank felt it was merely a slap on the wrist. Deputy Russell had filed a report on the animal cruelty complaint, but without more substantial evidence, it wouldn't go further than that. Meanwhile, Tyler Whitman made his displeasure known in more subtle ways. The bank suddenly discovered an issue with Frank's mortgage that required immediate attention. The town council, where Whitman held considerable sway, began discussing stricter zoning regulations that would directly impact Frank's property. The message was clear: cross the Whitmans, pay the price. Frank tried to shield Abby from these adult concerns, but she was more perceptive than he realized. One evening, she found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, his face drawn with worry. "Are we going to lose the house?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Frank looked up, startled. "No, kiddo. We're not losing anything. Just some grown-up problems to sort out." Abby slid into the chair across from him, valor settling at her feet. "Because of me? Because I spoke up?" "No," Frank said firmly. "Because some people in this town have forgotten what matters. But that's not on you. Never think that." She nodded, her fingers absently running through Valor's fur, a habit that seemed to calm them both. "My mom used to say that doing the right thing isn't always the easy thing. That's why not everyone does it." Frank's heart clenched at the mention of her mother. Abby rarely spoke of her parents, as if the memories were still too raw to touch. "Your mom was a wise woman. She also said that when you do the right thing, you find out who your real friends are." Abby looked up at him, her eyes older than her years. "I think we're finding that out now." Indeed they were. The next morning, Frank opened the front door to find Mrs. Kellerman and 3 other neighbors standing on his porch, each carrying covered dishes and determined expressions. "We heard what's happening," Mrs. Kellerman said without preamble. "Tyler Whitman might think he runs this town, but some of us have been here a lot longer than his fancy development company." By noon, Frank's kitchen was overflowing with casseroles, pies, and more significantly, offers of help. James from the hardware store came by to fix the leaky roof Frank had been putting off. Pastor Mike stopped in with information about a pro bono lawyer who specialized in property disputes. Even Principal Gardner made a discreet visit, bringing a book about therapy dogs and a quiet apology. "I should have done more," she admitted to Frank, watching through the window as Abby and Valor played in the yard. "I let politics influence my judgment." "It won't happen again." The support was heartening, but it came with an uncomfortable realization for Frank. Abby's story had made her a symbol in Oak Ridge's ongoing battle between old and new, between community values and commercial progress, and symbols, he knew all too well from his military days, often became targets. His concerns proved prophetic the following week when Abby discovered something tucked into her school locker, a crude drawing of a dog with X's for eyes and the words, "Accidents happen," scrawled across the bottom. She brought it straight to Frank, her face pale but composed. "It's not Bryce's handwriting," she said, handing him the paper. "But I think his friends did it." Frank took the drawing to Deputy Russell, who promised to look into it, but they both knew it would be nearly impossible to prove who was responsible. "I can talk to their parents," Russell offered, "but without solid proof." "I know," Frank sighed. "Just thought you should be aware." That night he installed new locks on all the doors and windows of the farmhouse. He also placed a call to another old military buddy who now worked in security systems. Better safe than sorry. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, Abby continued to progress. Her words came more readily now, though she remained thoughtful and economical with them. Her drawings evolved, too. Less shadows and fear, more complex scenes of Valor protecting her, of Frank standing guard at their home, of a community surrounding them like a human shield. One picture in particular caught Frank's attention, a detailed sketch of the night of the fire. Abby had never drawn this before, had never spoken of what happened that terrible night. In the foreground was her family's house, flames engulfing the structure. But it was the small detail in the corner that made Frank's blood run cold, A car parked down the street, barely visible through the smoke, with what looked like the Whitman Development Company logo on its side. "Abby," he said carefully, showing her the drawing, "is this what you saw that night?" She looked at the picture, then away, her body tense. Valor, sensing her distress, pressed closer against her legs. "I promised Mom," she whispered. Frank knelt beside her. "Promised her what, sweetheart?" Abby's eyes filled with tears. "Before the firefighters came, she told me to hide in the clubhouse in the backyard. She said not to tell anyone what I saw, that it wasn't safe." A cold fury rose in Frank's chest, but he kept his voice gentle. "And what did you see, Abby?" She shook her head, the words locked away again. Frank didn't push. The wall of silence that had protected her for so long couldn't be dismantled all at once. Instead, he put the drawing somewhere safe and made another call to Deputy Russell. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge was preparing for its annual Memorial Day Fair, a tradition as old as the town itself, complete with carnival rides, craft booths, pie-eating contests, and a ceremony honoring local veterans. In years past, Frank had always attended the ceremony but avoided the festivities afterward. This year, however, Abby expressed interest in going. "Valor's never been to a fair," she explained, as if that settled the matter. Frank was hesitant. The fair would be crowded, loud, potentially overwhelming for both Abby and Valor. More concerning was the certainty that the Whitmans would be there. Tyler never missed an opportunity for public visibility, especially in an election year. "I don't know, kiddo," he hedged. "It might be a lot for your first big outing." Abby looked at him with those solemn eyes. "I can't hide forever. Mom wouldn't want that." How could he argue with that? So on Memorial Day morning, Frank found himself ironing a clean shirt while Abby carefully tied a red bandana around Valor's neck. Not his official support vest, but a symbol of celebration nonetheless. "You sure about this?" Frank asked one more time as they climbed into his truck. Abby nodded, her face set with determination. "I'm sure." The fairgrounds were transformed with colorful banners, food stalls, and the cheerful chaos of a small-town celebration. After the somber ceremony honoring veterans, during which Frank stood tall in his old uniform, Abby and Valor respectfully at his side, they wandered through the fair. Valor stayed close to Abby, alert but calm amid the noise and movement. To Frank's surprise, people went out of their way to greet them. Mrs. Kellerman insisted they try her prize-winning apple pie. Principal Gardner stopped to tell Abby how well she was doing in her studies. Even some of the children from school waved or said hello, curiosity overcoming their usual hesitation. "Looks like you're something of a local celebrity," Frank commented as they shared a lemonade in the shade of an oak tree. Abby shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just want to be normal again." "Normal's overrated," Frank replied with a small smile. "But I know what you mean." They were heading toward the small Ferris wheel when Frank spotted Tyler and Bryce Whitman near the ring toss booth, surrounded by the usual cluster of business associates and sycophants. Frank steered Abby in the opposite direction, but it was too late. Tyler had seen them. "Thompson," he called, his voice carrying over the crowd. "A word, if you don't mind." Frank stopped, positioning himself slightly in front of Abby. "Not today, Whitman. We're just here to enjoy the fair." Tyler approached anyway, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Relax. It's a community event." "I'm not here to cause trouble." He looked down at Abby and Valor. "I see the dog's feeling better. Good to hear." The forced pleasantry made Frank's skin crawl. "What do you want, Tyler?" "Just to clear the air. That business at the school got out of hand. Boys will be boys, you know how it is. Bryce has learned his lesson." Tyler lowered his voice. "But I think it's time we all moved on, don't you? This town's too small for ongoing feuds." Before Frank could respond, Bryce appeared at his father's side, a group of friends hovering nearby. The boy's expression darkened when he saw Abby and Valor. "Dad, come on," Bryce muttered. "The mayor's looking for you." "In a minute," Tyler replied, his attention still on Frank. "Think about what I said, Thompson. Some situations can be resolved amicably with benefits for all parties. Others become unnecessarily complicated." The threat was thinly veiled, but Frank didn't rise to the bait. "We'll keep that in mind. Now, if you'll excuse us." What happened next occurred so quickly that Frank would later struggle to recall the exact sequence. Bryce, either emboldened by his father's presence or goaded by his watching friends, stepped forward and delivered a swift, deliberate kick to Valor's side. The German Shepherd yelped in pain and surprise. Abby cried out. Frank lunged toward Bryce, only to be blocked by Tyler, and then, cutting through the sudden commotion like a knife, came Abby's voice, not a whisper, not a careful, measured phrase, but a full-throated shout that stopped everyone in their tracks. "Don't you ever touch him again!" The force of her words seemed to physically push Bryce back. Around them the fair seemed to freeze, the carousel music suddenly distant, conversations dying mid-sentence, all eyes turning toward the girl who had been silent for so long. In the stunned silence that followed, Abby dropped to her knees beside Valor, who was still standing but favoring his right side. Her hands moved over him, checking for injury, her face a storm of emotion. "He's hurt," she said, looking up at Frank with tears in her eyes. "He's hurt, and he still didn't bite him. He could have, but he didn't." Indeed, Valor had shown remarkable restraint, a testament to his training and temperament. Despite the pain, he remained vigilant beside Abby, his eyes never leaving Bryce. Tyler recovered first, grabbing his son's arm. Bryce was just startled when the dog moved toward him. It was a reflex. "That's a lie," Abby interrupted, rising to her feet. "Everyone saw what he did. Everyone's been seeing what he does, they just pretend they don't." The crowd that had gathered murmured in agreement. Someone toward the back called out, "She's right. The Whitman boy's been bullying her for months." Tyler's face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. Come on, Bryce, we're leaving." He turned to Frank. "Keep that animal under control, Thompson, or next time there will be consequences." As the Whitmans pushed their way through the crowd, something strange happened. People moved aside to let them pass, but no one spoke to them, no one made eye contact. The usual deference was gone, replaced by a collective, silent judgment. Meanwhile, phones had appeared in many hands, recording the aftermath of the confrontation. Frank realized with a sinking feeling that this private moment was about to become very public. "Let's get Valor home," he said gently to Abby, who nodded, her burst of courage giving way to exhaustion. As they made their way back to the truck, Deputy Russell intercepted them. "I saw what happened," he said, his expression grim. "You want to press charges this time? We've got plenty of witnesses." Frank looked at Abby, who was stroking Valor's head, whispering reassurances to the dog. "Abby, it's your call." She considered the question with a seriousness beyond her years. "Not right now," she finally said. "Valor needs to see the vet first. Then we can decide." As they drove away from the fairgrounds, Frank noticed Abby staring out the window, her expression unreadable. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked. She turned to look at him, something new in her eyes, not just the pain and fear he'd grown accustomed to seeing, but a fierce, clear determination. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said. "Not my voice, not what I saw that night, not any of it." Frank nodded, understanding the weight of her decision. "Whenever you're ready, I'm here to listen." "I know," she said, her hand resting on Valor's head. "That's why I can be brave now." By the time they reached home, 3 voice messages waited on Frank's phone. One from the local newspaper, one from a regional TV station, and one from a lawyer offering pro bono services. The incident at the fair had already gone viral. Their quiet life was about to change dramatically, for better or worse. But as Frank watched Abby lead Valor carefully into the house, murmuring encouragement with each step, he knew one thing for certain. The wall of silence that had protected her, and perhaps protected others as well, had finally crumbled. And whatever storm came next, they would face it together. By sunrise, Abby's confrontation with Bryce Whitman wasn't just Oak Ridge news. It had become a national sensation. The 20-second video clip captured on a parent's phone showed the moment perfectly. A small girl standing fierce and protective over her injured German shepherd, her voice breaking through months of silence to defend the animal who had never left her side. The headline that accompanied most shares read simply, "Traumatized girl speaks first words in a year to defend her dog." Frank discovered the viral spread when his phone began ringing at 6:15 a.m. It was Deputy Russell. "Turn on Channel 7, he said without preamble. "You and Abby are the lead story." Sure enough, there they were. Abby's face partially blurred due to her age, but the moment captured in all its raw emotion. The morning anchors discussed the story with appropriately concerned expressions, one of them nearly tearing up as she described Abby's traumatic background and her special bond with Valor. "Oh, this is unexpected," Frank muttered, watching as the segment ended with contact information for a GoFundMe page someone had apparently created overnight for Valor's veterinary care. "That's not all," Russell continued. "Tyler Whitman's been blowing up the sheriff's phone since dawn. He's threatening a defamation lawsuit against whoever posted the video. Claims it's been edited to make Bryce look bad." Frank snorted. "There were 50 witnesses, Jim. I know that. But Whitman's not used to being on the wrong side of public opinion. He's panicking." Russell paused. "How's the dog?" "Bruised ribs, according to the vet. No permanent damage. He's tough." Frank glanced toward Abby's bedroom, where she and Valor had spent the night huddled together. "And Abby's, well, different, like something finally broke loose inside her. That's good, right?" "I think so. But this attention, it's a lot." Frank's concerns proved valid when he opened the front door an hour later to collect the morning paper and found 2 news vans parked at the end of his driveway. A reporter spotted him and immediately started heading toward the house, cameraman in tow. "Mr. Thompson, could we get a statement about yesterday's incident? Is Abigail willing to speak on camera about her experience?" Frank shut the door firmly and drew the curtains. When Abby came into the kitchen for breakfast, he tried to explain the situation in a way that wouldn't frighten her. "Some people saw what happened yesterday, and they're interested in our story," he said carefully. "But we don't have to talk to them if you don't want to." Abby nodded, pouring cereal for herself and setting aside some bacon for Valor, who lay nearby, watching her with devoted eyes. "They want to know why I didn't talk before," she said, not a question but a statement. "Probably," Frank acknowledged. "People are curious about things they don't understand." Abby considered this as she ate. "I didn't talk because it hurt too much," she finally said. "Like when you touch a hot stove and your body learns not to do that anymore." The simplicity and depth of her explanation caught Frank off guard. "That's a good way to put it." "But now it hurts more not to talk," she continued. "Especially when people hurt Valor, or when they lie about what happened to Mom and Dad." Frank set down his coffee cup. "What lies, Abby?" She met his eyes directly. "That it was an accident. The fire." Frank had suspected as much since seeing her drawing, but hearing her say it aloud made his heart race. "Abby, if you know something about the fire, that's very important. We should talk to Deputy Russell." She nodded solemnly. "I know. But first, I need to write something." To Frank's surprise, Abby spent the morning at the kitchen table with a notebook and pencil, carefully composing a letter. Valor remained at her side, occasionally nudging her hand when she paused too long, as if encouraging her to continue. When she finally handed the finished letter to Frank, his throat tightened with emotion as he read, "My name is Abigail Sullivan. I'm 11 years old. I stopped talking after my parents died in a fire last year. Everyone thought I was broken, but I wasn't. I was keeping a promise to my mom to stay safe and quiet until the right time. Valor found me when I needed him most. He's not just my dog. He's the reason I remembered how to be brave. When that boy hurt him, I couldn't be quiet anymore. Some people think being silent means you're weak, but sometimes it's how you survive. And sometimes breaking that silence is how you start to heal. I want to thank everyone who cared about us. I'm ready to tell my story now, but I'll only tell it once, and I'll only tell it to people who will listen to all of it, even the hard parts." The letter was signed simply Abby and Valor, with a small paw print drawn beside her name. "This is really good, Abby," Frank said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "What do you want to do with it? Can we put it online so people understand?" With help from Principal Gardner, who came by the house that afternoon, slipping past the growing media encampment with surprising stealth, they set up a simple social media page called Valor's Voice. Abby's letter was the first post, accompanied by a photo Frank had taken of her and Valor sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunrise. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By evening, the post had been shared thousands of times. Messages flooded in, from parents of traumatized children, from veterans with PTSD, from animal rescue organizations, all touched by the simple honesty of Abby's words. The GoFundMe, initially set up for Valor's vet bills, had expanded its goals to include training Valor as a certified therapy dog and establishing a program to help other children who had experienced trauma. The original target of $5,000 was surpassed within hours, reaching over $50,000 by nightfall. "This is crazy," Frank murmured, scrolling through the comments on Abby's post. People from all over the country, all over the world even. Abby leaned against his shoulder, reading along with him. "They understand," she said simply. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Tyler Whitman made good on his threat, filing a formal complaint with the school board claiming that Abby's outburst had defamed his son and caused emotional damage. He demanded a hearing, insisting that both Abby and Valor be banned from school property pending a full investigation. When Deputy Russell brought the news, Frank was furious. "This is harassment, plain and simple. He's trying to punish her for speaking up." "I know," Russell agreed, "but the board has to follow procedure. The hearing's set for next Friday." "And in the meantime?" "Abby can still attend school, but—" Russell hesitated. "But Valor can't," Frank finished, a cold weight settling in his stomach. "How am I supposed to tell her that?" As it turned out, Abby took the news with the same quiet resilience she'd shown throughout their ordeal. "Valor will be okay here during school," she said, though her hand tightened in the dog's fur. "I can be brave for both of us now." The night before the hearing, Frank couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch watching the stars and trying to quiet the anxiety churning inside him. So much had happened in such a short time. Abby finding her voice, the viral video, the outpouring of support, and now this hearing that could determine whether Valor would be allowed back at school. But beneath all of that lay something even more significant. Abby's claim that the fire that killed her parents wasn't an accident. If that was true, if there was evidence of arson connected to Tyler Whitman, then the stakes were far higher than a school board hearing. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the soft creak of the screen door. Abby stood there in her pajamas, Valor at her side. "Couldn't sleep either?" Frank asked, making room for her on the porch swing. She shook her head, settling beside him. "I'm scared about tomorrow." That's understandable. But remember what we talked about. Being scared doesn't make you weak. I know. She was quiet for a moment, then, do you think they'll believe me? About Valor? About everything? Frank chose his words carefully. Yeah, the truth has a way of making itself known, even when people try to hide it. It might take time, but I believe you, and that's a start. Abby nodded, leaning against his arm. Together, they watched the night sky in silence, each drawing strength from the other's presence. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and warm. Abby dressed herself with care, choosing a blue dress that had belonged to her mother, carefully altered by Mrs. Kellerman to fit her smaller frame. She tied Valor's red bandana around his neck, not his service vest, but a symbol of their bond nonetheless. When they arrived at the school gymnasium, which had been set up for the hearing, Frank was stunned by the crowd. It seemed half the town had turned out, many wearing red bandanas tied around their wrists or arms in solidarity. Signs reading, "We Believe Abby" and "Justice for Valor" dotted the crowd. Inside, the setup was intimidating, a long table where the school board members sat, chairs for witnesses and participants, and rows of seating for spectators. Tyler and Bryce Whitman were already there, Tyler in an expensive suit, Bryce looking uncomfortable in a tie that seemed to be choking him. Principal Gardner approached them at the door. "There's been a development," she said quietly. "The board has agreed to allow Valor inside for the duration of the hearing given the circumstances. He can stay with Abby." Relief washed over Frank. At least Abby would have Valor's comforting presence during what promised to be an ordeal. The hearing began with formal introductions and an explanation of the process. Board President Eleanor Jenkins, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, made it clear that this was not a court of law, but an administrative proceeding to determine whether school policies had been violated and what actions, if any, should be taken. Tyler Whitman spoke first, his voice smooth and practiced. He expressed concern about the hostile environment created by allowing an untrained animal on school grounds. He suggested that Abby's emotional outburst at the fair demonstrated instability that could be disruptive to other students. He even implied that Frank was exploiting Abby's situation for attention and financial gain, citing the viral GoFundMe campaign. Throughout his testimony, Valor remained perfectly still beside Abby, his eyes tracking Tyler's movements but his body relaxed and controlled. The dog's disciplined behavior seemed to directly contradict Tyler's claims about him being dangerous or unpredictable. When it was Bryce's turn to speak, the boy appeared nervous, his eyes darting between his father and the floor. "The dog growls at me," he mumbled. "It's scary." "And he pointed at Abby. "She never talked before, then suddenly she's yelling at me in front of everyone." "And why was Abigail yelling at you, Bryce?" Board member Dr. Martinez asked, her tone gentle but firm. Bryce glanced at his father, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "I accidentally bumped into her dog. It wasn't a big deal. Everyone's making it a huge thing." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people who had witnessed the incident at the fair shook their heads in disbelief at this revision of events. Finally, it was Abby's turn. Frank gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze as she walked to the front of the room, Valor matching her pace perfectly. The gymnasium fell silent as she faced the board, her small figure somehow commanding the attention of everyone present. "My name is Abigail Sullivan," she began, her voice clear though quiet. "Last year I lost my parents in a fire. After that I stopped talking. Not because I couldn't, but because it felt safer not to." She went on to explain how Valor had come into her life, how his presence had helped her begin to heal, and how his training made him perfect for the role of support animal. She described the bullying she had endured from Bryce, the incidents of harassment that had escalated over time. "Valor never growled at Bryce unless Bryce was threatening me," she said firmly. And he never, ever tried to bite him, even when Bryce hurt him. That's because Valor was trained to protect, not to attack. Her testimony was powerful in its simplicity and directness. When she finished speaking, she remained standing, waiting for questions. "How do we know the dog won't become aggressive in the future?" one board member asked. "Valor was a military dog before he found me," Abby replied. "He knows how to follow rules better than most people." This revelation caused another stir in the audience. Frank hadn't known she was aware of this. He'd only suspected it himself based on Valor's behavior. "And how do you know this?" Board President Jenkins asked, leaning forward with interest. "He responds to commands that regular dogs don't know. And he has a tattoo in his ear, a serial number. Frank's friend who works with military dogs confirmed it." Frank blinked in surprise. Abby had been doing her own investigation all along. Tyler Whitman stood abruptly. "This is absurd. Even if the dog was once a military animal, that doesn't mean it's safe around children. In fact, it might have been exposed to combat situations that make it unpredictable and dangerous." "Valor is not dangerous," Abby said, her voice rising slightly. "The only one who's been dangerous is Bryce. And maybe his dad, too." A hush fell over the gymnasium. "What exactly are you implying, young lady?" President Jenkins asked. Abby took a deep breath, her hand resting on Valor's head. "I'm saying that I saw Mr. Whitman's car outside our house the night of the fire. I saw someone pour something around the back porch, and then there were flames everywhere. My mom saw it too. She told me to hide and not tell anyone what I saw because it wasn't safe." The silence that followed was absolute. Tyler Whitman's face had gone pale. Bryce stared at his father, confusion and dawning horror in his expression. "That's a very serious accusation," President Jenkins said carefully, "one that goes far beyond the scope of this hearing." "I know," Abby replied, "but I promised I wouldn't hide any more. Not my voice, not the truth, not any of it." Deputy Russell, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room, was now on his feet, speaking quietly into his radio. Tyler Whitman, seeing this, grabbed his son's arm. "This hearing is a farce," he announced. "We're leaving." "I think you should stay right where you are, Mr. Whitman," came Russell's voice from the back of the room. "We have some things to discuss about the night of the Sullivan fire." What followed was chaos. Tyler attempting to leave, board members calling for order, spectators on their feet. Through it all, Abby remained where she was, Valor pressed against her leg, a small island of calm in the storm. Later, after statements had been taken and Tyler Whitman had been escorted to the sheriff's office for questioning, Frank found Abby sitting outside on the school steps, Valor's head in her lap. "You did good in there," he said, sitting beside her. "Real good." She nodded, her fingers gently stroking Valor's ears. "I was scared." "I know, but you did it anyway." "Like Valor," she said, a small smile touching her lips. "He's always brave even when he's scared." Frank put an arm around her shoulders, and together they watched as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Whatever came next, investigations, possibly trials, certainly more public attention, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together, with courage born not from fearlessness, but from the determination to protect what mattered most. As if reading his thoughts, Abby leaned against him. "We're going to be okay, aren't we? You and me and Valor?" Frank looked down at her, this remarkable child who had endured so much and still found the strength to speak her truth. "Yeah, kiddo," he said softly. "We're going to be just fine." The days following the school board hearing unfolded in a blur of statements, investigations, and headlines. Tyler Whitman was released on bail pending a full investigation into Abby's allegations about the fire. His normally confident public persona had cracked, revealing a desperate man whose carefully constructed empire was beginning to crumble. For Abby, the aftermath brought mixed emotions. There was relief in finally speaking her truth, but also the weight of renewed grief as she recounted the details of that terrible night to investigators. Through it all, Valor remained her constant, his steady presence anchoring her when memories threatened to pull her under. Frank did his best to shield her from the worst of the media attention, turning down interview requests and keeping reporters at bay. "She said what she needed to say," he told them firmly. "Now let her be a kid again." But being just a kid wasn't so simple anymore. Abby had become something of a symbol in Oak Ridge and beyond, the brave girl who found her voice to protect her dog and seek justice for her parents. The Valor's Voice page had grown to over 200,000 followers, with messages pouring in from around the country. The GoFundMe had surpassed $75,000, the extra funds now earmarked for a foundation to provide service dogs to traumatized children. One morning, as Frank checked the mail, he found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph of a soldier in desert fatigues, kneeling beside a younger, healthier Valor in a military working dog vest. The note on the back read simply, "Thank you for taking care of my partner. He saved my life in Afghanistan. Looks like he's still saving lives. Sergeant Michael Collins, U.S. Army, return." Frank showed the photo to Abby, who studied it with solemn interest. "Is this Valor's first person?" she asked. "Seems like it," Frank replied. Soldiers and their dogs form special bonds. Abby nodded, gently touching the image. "He found us because we needed him. And maybe he needed us, too." The connection to Sergeant Collins added another layer to Valor's story, one that resonated deeply with the veterans in Oak Ridge. The local VFW post reached out, offering support and expressing interest in helping with Valor's therapy dog certification once his ribs had fully healed. Meanwhile, the investigation into the fire progressed. Forensic evidence, preserved from the original scene but never fully analyzed, now supported Abby's account. Financial records showed that Tyler Whitman's company had been on the verge of bankruptcy before securing the contract for the new shopping center, a development that required the precise location where the Sullivan home had stood. Bryce Whitman, caught in the middle of his father's downfall, withdrew from school. Rumors circulated that he and his mother had gone to stay with relatives in another state, distancing themselves from Tyler and the growing scandal. For Abby, the confirmation that her parents' deaths weren't a tragic accident but a deliberate act brought both vindication and fresh pain. One evening, Frank found her sitting on the back porch, Valor's head in her lap, tears streaming silently down her face. "It's okay to be sad, kiddo," he said, settling beside her. "Even when justice is coming, grief still has its say." "I miss them," she whispered. "Every day. And now, knowing why they're gone?" Frank nodded, his own throat tight. "I know. It's a special kind of hurt when bad things happen for no reason. Might be worse when they happen for a terrible reason. Mom told me to stay quiet to be safe," Abby continued, "but I think she would be okay with me speaking now." "I'm sure of it," Frank agreed. "Your mom was protecting you the only way she could. Now you're strong enough to protect yourself and others too." The night took an unexpected turn when Deputy Russell arrived at the farmhouse around 9 o'clock, his expression grave. Frank sent Abby inside while they spoke on the porch. "Tyler Whitman tried to leave town tonight," Russell explained. "Had a private plane fueled up at the county airstrip. We intercepted him based on the flight plan he filed. He was headed to a non-extradition country." Frank felt a cold anger settle in his chest. "So he was running. Looks that way, and it gets worse. We found documents in his briefcase. detailed plans for the shopping center, dated 2 weeks before the Sullivan fire. The plans show the entire project centered exactly where their house stood. Premeditation, Frank said grimly. Russell nodded. Along with financial fraud, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges the DA is putting together. Tyler Whitman won't be a free man for a very long time. It should have felt like victory, but Frank knew better than most that justice didn't erase loss. It wouldn't bring back Abby's parents or restore the childhood that had been stolen from her, but perhaps it would allow her to move forward without the shadow of unanswered questions hanging over her. Later that night, Frank heard soft footsteps in the hallway. He opened his bedroom door to find Abby standing there in her pajamas, Valor at her side. "Can't sleep?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I heard Deputy Russell. Is it true? About Mr. Whitman trying to leave?" Frank nodded, seeing no point in hiding the truth from her. "Yes, but they stopped him. He's going to face what he did." Abby absorbed this information with the same quiet strength she'd shown throughout their ordeal. "Good," she said simply. Then, after a moment, "What happens to us now?" The question caught Frank off guard. "What do you mean, kiddo?" "When all this is over, the investigation and everything, what happens to me, to Valor, to—" She hesitated. "To us?" Frank knelt down to her eye level, his heart full. "Nothing changes there, Abby. You and Valor and me, we're family now. If that's what you want." She nodded, relief washing over her face. "That's what I want." "Then that's what we'll be," Frank promised. "No matter what else happens." The next morning brought unexpected news. The school board had reached a unanimous decision overnight. Valor would be permitted to return to school with Abby as her official support animal, with no restrictions beyond standard safety protocols. Furthermore, Principal Gardner called personally to inform them that the school was considering a pilot program for therapy dogs inspired by Valor's positive impact. "Public opinion can be a powerful force," she admitted to Frank, "but in this case, it pushed us toward the right decision. That dog has done more good for Abby than a year of traditional therapy." The victory was sweet but short-lived. That same afternoon, as Abby and Frank were preparing to take Valor for his first walk since the incident at the fair, they discovered something spray-painted across their mailbox. "Mute Freak." Frank quickly positioned himself to block Abby's view, but she had already seen it. To his surprise, she didn't cry or retreat into silence. Instead, she studied the ugly words with a thoughtful expression. "They're still scared," she said. "Who is?" Frank asked, confused. "Whoever did this? They're scared because I'm not hiding anymore." She looked up at him, her eyes clear and determined. "We should clean it off, but I'm not going to be scared back into being quiet." Frank felt a surge of pride so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. This child, who had endured more tragedy in her short life than most adults, possessed a wisdom and resilience that humbled him. Together, they scrubbed away the hateful message. 3 neighbors, seeing their efforts, came over to help without being asked. By evening, the mailbox was clean again and freshly painted, with Mrs. Kellerman adding a small decorative paw print as a finishing touch. "That's how we do things in this town," she declared, wiping paint from her hands. "We fix what others break." The incident, far from breaking Abby's spirit, seemed to strengthen her resolve. The next day, she asked Frank if she could visit the site where her family's home had stood, something she hadn't done since the night of the fire. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Frank asked gently. Abby nodded, her hand automatically finding Valor's fur. "I need to say goodbye properly. Mom and Dad aren't there anymore, but it was still our home." So on a clear Saturday morning, they drove to the empty lot at the edge of town, Construction on the shopping center had been permanently halted following Tyler Whitman's arrest, leaving nothing but a chain-link fence surrounding the cleared land where the Sullivan house had once stood. Frank parked across the street, watching Abby carefully for signs of distress. "We can leave any time you want," he reminded her. She nodded, then opened the truck door. Valor jumped down first, alert and protective as always. Together, the three of them approached the fence. Abby stood silently for a long time, her fingers hooked through the chain links, looking at the empty space that had once contained her entire world. Valor pressed against her legs as if lending her his strength. "They would have liked you," she told the dog softly. "Especially Dad. He always wanted a dog, but Mom was allergic." She smiled faintly at the memory. "He said when I was older we'd get a hypoallergenic one and Mom would just have to deal with it." Frank stood a respectful distance away, giving her space for this private moment of remembrance. He watched as she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a charm bracelet he hadn't seen before. "This was Mom's," Abby explained, noticing his gaze. "The firefighters found it afterward. It's the only thing I have left from her." She carefully tied it to the fence. "I'm not leaving her behind, just letting her rest now." The simple ceremony brought tears to Frank's eyes. There was something profoundly brave about this child's ability to honor her past while still moving toward her future. As they turned to leave, a car pulled up behind Frank's truck. Deputy Russell stepped out, accompanied by a man Frank didn't recognize, tall, lean, with the unmistakable bearing of military service despite his civilian clothes. "Hope we're not intruding," Russell said as they approached. "This is Sergeant Michael Collins. He saw your post about valor and drove down from North Carolina." The man stepped forward, his eyes immediately finding the German shepherd. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak, emotion written clearly across his face. "Ranger," he finally said, his voice rough. That was his service name. Valor's reaction was immediate and astonishing. His ears perked up, his posture straightened, and he let out a soft whine of recognition. Abby looked between the dog and the man, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You were his handler," she said. "In the war." Collins nodded, kneeling down to eye level with Valor but not approaching further. "2 tours in Afghanistan together. He saved my unit from an IED ambush, took shrapnel in his side. They gave him a medal for it." "He has a scar there," Abby confirmed. "I feel it when I hug him. After he was injured, they retired him. He was supposed to come home with me, but—" Collins paused, collecting himself. "There was an attack on the base the day before our transport. Chaos everywhere. He got spooked by an explosion and bolted. By the time I was discharged 3 months later, the unit had lost track of him. I've been searching ever since." The revelation hung in the air between them. Frank watched Abby carefully, concerned about how she would take this news. Valor, or Ranger, had been her lifeline, her protector, her reason for finding her voice again. And now his original handler had returned. To his surprise, Abby was the first to break the silence. "He found me after the fire," she said simply. "I think he knew I needed him." Collins nodded, blinking back tears. "That sounds like him. Always had a sixth sense about who needed protecting." Abby knelt beside Valor, wrapping her arms around his neck. She whispered something in his ear that Frank couldn't hear, then stood up straight. "Go say hello," she told the dog softly. "It's okay." As if understanding her perfectly, Valor approached his former handler slowly. Collins remained perfectly still, allowing the dog to make the choice. When Valor finally reached him, he sniffed carefully at the man's hands, then his face, and then, with a soft whine, pressed his head against Collins's chest. The soldier's composure broke. He wrapped his arms around the dog, burying his face in Valor's fur. "Hey, buddy," he murmured. I missed you too. Frank moved to Abby's side, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. She leaned against him but kept her eyes on Valor and Collins, her expression a complex mixture of joy and sorrow. "He needs to go with him, doesn't he?" she asked quietly. The question tore at Frank's heart. "I don't know, kiddo. That's not for us to decide." When Collins finally stood, wiping his eyes unashamedly, he looked at Abby with deep respect. "I've been following your story," he said. "What you did for him, standing up to that bully, finding your voice again, that's real courage." Abby shrugged slightly. "Valor taught me how to be brave." "Ranger," Collins corrected gently, then smiled. "Though valor suits him too, it means courage and worth." "I know," Abby replied. "That's why I chose it." An uncomfortable silence fell as the unspoken question hung between them. What happened now? Who had the stronger claim to this extraordinary dog, the soldier who had trained him and served alongside him, or the child whose healing had depended on him? It was Collins who finally addressed it. "I didn't come here to take him away from you," he said, surprising everyone. "When I saw your story, I just needed to know he was okay, that he'd found somewhere good." He looked down at Valor, who was now standing exactly halfway between him and Abby, as if physically torn between his past and present. "And it looks like he found exactly where he needed to be." Relief washed over Abby's face. "You're not taking him?" Collins shook his head. "Some things happen for a reason, even the painful ones. Ranger, Valor found you when you both needed healing. I wouldn't break that bond." He smiled sadly. "Besides, I'm not in a position to care for him properly right now. Still working through some of my own war souvenirs, you might say." Frank recognized the euphemism for what it was. PTSD, the invisible wound so many veterans brought home. "Where are you staying while you're in town?" Frank asked, an idea forming. "Just the motel off the highway," Collins replied. "Heading back tomorrow, probably." Frank exchanged a glance with Abby, who nodded slightly, understanding his unspoken question. "We've got a spare room," he offered, "and I reckon there's a certain dog who'd appreciate some time with both of you." Might do everyone some good. The invitation led to an unexpected healing, not just for Valor, caught between his past and present, but for all of them. Over the next few days, Collins shared stories of Valor's military service, his training, his acts of bravery. Abby, in turn, showed him how she and Valor communicated, the subtle signals they'd developed, the routines that brought them both comfort. And something remarkable happened. Rather than diminishing Abby and Valor's bond, Collins' presence seemed to strengthen it. With his expert guidance, Valor's training was refreshed and enhanced. He taught Abby commands that brought out Valor's service dog instincts, making him an even more effective support animal. "He's got the best of both worlds now," Collins observed one evening as they watched Abby and Valor playing in the yard. "The discipline from his military training and the love from his new mission with Abby." Frank nodded, recognizing the truth in this. "Seems like he was always meant to find her. Just took a roundabout way to get there." "Some of the best journeys do," Collins replied, his gaze distant. "Even the painful ones." Summer descended on Oak Ridge with the particular intensity of Georgia heat, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to spread through the town like the kudzu vines climbing the old oak trees. The scandal surrounding Tyler Whitman had broken wide open, revealing a pattern of corruption and intimidation that had shaped the town's development for years. As the investigation deepened, more citizens came forward with their own stories of being pressured or threatened by Whitman developments. For Abby, the summer marked a period of profound transformation. The silent, traumatized child who had arrived at Frank's farmhouse a year ago was emerging into someone new, still thoughtful and reserved by nature, but no longer imprisoned by her silence. Her words, when she chose to use them, carried the weight and wisdom of someone who had journeyed through darkness and found her way back to light. Sergeant Collins extended his stay in Oak Ridge, renting a small cabin by the lake just a few miles from Frank's property. His presence became a healing force, not just for Valor, but for Abby as well. The three of them spent long afternoons training together, Collins teaching Abby the specialized commands and techniques that would help Valor serve as an even more effective support animal. "He's responding better to you than he ever did to our drill instructors," Collins remarked one day, watching as Valor executed a complex series of movements under Abby's quiet direction. "You've got a natural way with him." Abby smiled, the expression coming more easily to her these days. "We understand each other," she said simply, reaching down to scratch behind Valor's ears. The dog leaned into her touch, his dark eyes alert and content. Frank observed these sessions from the porch, marveling at the bond between the child and the dog. It transcended ordinary companionship, even the special connection between a service animal and its person. There was something almost mystical in the way they communicated, as if each could read the other's thoughts. One particularly humid afternoon, as Collins was demonstrating how to guide Valor through a perimeter check of the property, a skill that would help Abby feel safer in unfamiliar environments, Frank received an unexpected call from Deputy Russell. "Thought you'd want to know," Russell said without preamble. "The DA's office has finished processing the evidence from Whitman's files. They found documentation proving he ordered the arson that killed the Sullivans, hired some out-of-town thug to do the actual job, but the paper trail leads straight back to him." Frank stepped away from the training session, lowering his voice. "Is this information public yet?" "We'll be by tomorrow morning. They're holding a press conference at 9. Russell paused. "How do you think Abby will take it?" "Hard to say," Frank admitted. "She's known the truth all along in her own way, but having it confirmed officially, that's different." "There's something else," Russell continued. "They found plans for other potential acquisitions in Whitman's files, properties he was targeting if owners wouldn't sell willingly." A heavy pause. "Your place was on the list, Frank. Marked as resistant but necessary." A cold anger settled in Frank's chest. "Was there a method listed for my property as well?" "Nothing specific, but given what we know now—" "Yeah," Frank said grimly. "I get the picture." After ending the call, Frank stood on the porch for a long moment, watching as Abby guided Valor through the training exercise, her small face set with concentration. The knowledge that both of them had been in Whitman's crosshairs, that the nightmare Abby had lived through might have been visited upon them as well, filled him with a protective fury that took his breath away. That evening, after Collins had gone back to his cabin and Abby was getting ready for bed, Frank sat her down in the living room to share the news about the investigation. "The police found proof that Mr. Whitman was responsible for the fire," he said gently. "I wanted you to hear it from me before it's on the news tomorrow." Abby absorbed this information with the quiet thoughtfulness that had become her hallmark. Valor, sensing the gravity of the conversation, pressed closer against her side. "I knew it was him," she said finally. "I saw his car that night. I heard Mom on the phone earlier, telling someone she was going to report him for trying to force people to sell their homes." Frank nodded, allowing her the space to process. "The DA says there will definitely be a trial, but with the evidence they have, it's almost certain Whitman will go to prison for a very long time." "Will I have to testify?" Abby asked, a flicker of anxiety crossing her face. "That's up to you," Frank assured her. "Your statement and the evidence they found might be enough, but if you want to speak in court to tell your story directly, that's your choice." Abby considered this, her fingers absently stroking Valor's fur. "I want to," she said finally. "I promised I wouldn't be silent anymore." not about what matters. Frank felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. It won't be easy. Whitman's lawyers will try to confuse you, make you doubt yourself. I know, Abby replied with a maturity that sometimes startled him. But Valor will be with me, right? Every step of the way, Frank promised. Both of us will. The news of Whitman's imminent indictment for murder, arson, and corruption broke the next morning as expected. Oak Ridge, already reeling from the earlier revelations, absorbed this final confirmation with a mixture of vindication and sorrow. The Sullivans had been well liked in the community, their deaths a tragedy that had touched many lives. To learn that they had been deliberately killed for something as crass as a real estate development struck at the heart of the town's self-image. Reporters once again descended on Frank's property, seeking comments from Abby. This time, however, the community formed a protective barrier. Neighbors took turns monitoring the end of the driveway, turning away journalists with firm but polite refusals. Pastor Mike from the local church issued a statement asking for privacy for a child who has already endured more than enough public scrutiny. Even the school became involved, with Principal Gardner organizing a letter-writing campaign among Abby's classmates. The simple messages of support. We're thinking of you. Valor is the coolest dog ever. You're really brave. Arrived in a handmade box decorated with paw prints and hearts. Folks around here take care of their own, Mrs. Kellerman explained when she delivered a fresh casserole and found Frank overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Took us too long to realize what that Whitman fellow was up to, but we won't let him or his kind hurt anyone else in this town. The solidarity was a balm during an otherwise difficult time. As the legal proceedings against Tyler Whitman ramped up, Abby found herself at the center of a complex legal process. Deputy Russell, acting as liaison between the family and the district attorney's office, did his best to shield her from the most traumatic aspects of the case, but some details were unavoidable. During one particularly tough meeting with the prosecutors, where Abby had to recount exactly what she'd seen the night of the fire, she froze mid-sentence, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow, the beginning of a panic attack. Before Frank could reach her, Valor was already in action, pressing his weight against her legs, nudging her hands with his nose, redirecting her attention to the present moment and away from the traumatic memory. The lead prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Catherine Benson, watched this interaction with interest. That's quite a partnership, she remarked after Abby had calmed. How long has she had the dog? About 8 months, Frank replied. He found us during a thunderstorm last fall. Benson nodded thoughtfully. I've worked with trauma victims who use service animals before, but I've never seen one respond so intuitively. She turned to Abby. Would having Valor with you in the courtroom help you feel more comfortable testifying? Abby nodded, her hand still buried in the dog's fur. I can be brave if he's there. Then I'll make it happen, Benson promised. We'll file the necessary paperwork for him to be present during your testimony. This small victory was overshadowed the next day when they discovered a more ominous development. Frank, checking the property as he did every morning, found the gate to the back pasture standing open, a gate he knew had been securely latched the night before. Near the latch were scratch marks that looked deliberate, not accidental. He called Deputy Russell immediately, who arrived within 20 minutes to examine the scene. Could be kids messing around, Russell suggested, though his expression said he didn't believe it, or could be someone sending a message. Whitman might be in custody, but he still has friends in town, Frank agreed grimly. People who worked for him benefited from his projects. Russell nodded. I'll increase patrols past your place, but honestly, Frank, you might want to consider additional security. Maybe staying somewhere else until after the trial. Frank shook his head firmly. This is our home. We're not being driven out of it. That evening, as Frank was installing new, sturdier locks on all the exterior doors, Collins arrived for his daily visit with Valor. Upon hearing about the gate incident, the former soldier's expression darkened. "Mind if I take a look around the property?" he asked. "Military habits die hard. I've got an eye for security vulnerabilities." Frank welcomed the assistance, and the two men spent the next hour conducting a thorough perimeter check. Collins identified several potential weak points, areas where the fencing needed reinforcement, sight lines that should be cleared, exterior lights that should be added. "Your biggest advantage is Valor," Collins noted as they returned to the house. "His hearing and sense of smell are far superior to any security system, but he needs to know what his job is." This led to a shift in their training sessions. With Abby's eager participation, Collins began teaching Valor more specialized protective behaviors, alerting to unfamiliar presences on the property, performing perimeter checks, even standing guard outside Abby's bedroom door at night. "We're not teaching him to attack," Collins explained carefully to Abby. "That's not his purpose. We're teaching him to warn you, to create space between you and potential threats, and to lead you to safety if necessary." Abby absorbed these lessons with the same quiet focus she brought to everything involving Valor. Frank, watching them work together, realized that the training was healing for all of them, giving Abby a sense of control over her environment, allowing Collins to use his military skills for protection rather than combat, and providing Valor with a clear mission that honored both his past training and his current bond with Abby. The security concerns took on new urgency when, a week before the trial was scheduled to begin, an unmarked envelope arrived in Frank's mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message: "Kids should be seen, not heard." Frank immediately called Deputy Russell, who arrived with a forensics technician to collect the letter as evidence. "This crosses the line from vandalism to intimidation of a witness," Russell said, his expression grim. "The DA will want to know about this right away." While they were still discussing the letter, Collins arrived for the day's training session. Upon hearing about the threat, his military bearing became more pronounced, his eyes scanning the surroundings with heightened vigilance. "Where's Abby now?" he asked, tension evident in his voice. "Inside with Valor," Frank assured him. "She doesn't know about the letter yet." Collins nodded, relief visible on his face. "Good. Let's keep it that way for now. But I think I should stay here until the trial's over, if that's all right with you." Frank accepted the offer gratefully. Having a former Special Forces soldier on the property brought an additional layer of security that eased some of his worry. They set up a cot in the small home office, converting it into temporary quarters for Collins. That night, after explaining to Abby that Collins would be staying with them for a while, framing it as an extended training opportunity for Valor rather than a security measure, Frank found himself sitting on the porch with the sergeant, both men watching the darkness beyond the yard with trained eyes. "You know," Collins said after a companionable silence, "when I first heard about Valor showing up here, I thought it was just a strange coincidence. A lost military dog finding his way to a traumatized kid who needed him." "And now?" Frank prompted. Collins smiled faintly. "Now I'm not so sure it was coincidence at all. That dog has always had a sixth sense about who needs protecting. Maybe he was meant to find Abby all along." Frank nodded, understanding the sentiment. "My grandmother would have called it providence, said God works in mysterious ways." "Whatever you call it," Collins replied, "I'm grateful he found her." And that she found her voice again because of him. As the trial date approached, Abby's anxiety manifested in subtle ways, a return to drawing dark, smoky images, waking in the night with silent tears, clinging to Valor more intensely during the day. Frank and Collins did their best to maintain normalcy, continuing their training sessions and finding activities to distract her from the looming court appearance. One afternoon, a few days before the trial, Principal Gardner called with an unexpected request. The school had been developing its therapy dog program, inspired by Valor's impact on Abby, and wanted to know if Abby would be willing to speak to the committee about her experience. It wouldn't be a big audience, Gardner assured Frank. Just 5 or 6 educators and the school counselor. But hearing from Abby directly would be invaluable for shaping the program. Frank relayed the request to Abby, prepared for her to decline given the timing. To his surprise, she agreed immediately. "I want to help other kids like me," she explained, her voice soft but determined. "And show them that being different isn't being broken." The small presentation at the school became an unexpected turning point. Standing before the committee with Valor at her side, Abby spoke with a quiet eloquence about her journey from silence to voice, and the crucial role Valor had played in that transformation. "He didn't make me talk," she explained. "He made me feel safe enough to remember how. And when I finally did speak, it was to protect him, because that's what you do for someone who protects you." The educators listened with rapt attention, several openly wiping away tears. When Abby finished speaking, the head of the committee, a stern-looking man who had initially seemed skeptical about the therapy dog program, was the first to stand and applaud. "Young lady," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "I believe you've just ensured that this program will move forward. Thank you for your courage in sharing your story." As they were leaving the school, Abby turned to Frank with an expression of newfound determination. "I'm ready for the trial now," she said. "I can do this." Frank believed her. In that moment, looking at the quiet strength in her young face, he realized that Abby had transformed from a victim of circumstances into an advocate for her own truth. The journey wasn't over. There would still be difficult days ahead, setbacks and struggles as she continued to process her trauma. But she was moving forward with a resilience that astonished him. The night before the trial, as a summer thunderstorm rolled across Oak Ridge, Frank found Abby sitting on the floor of her bedroom, arms wrapped around Valor, her face buried in his fur. For a moment he feared she was having a panic attack. The storm still triggered memories of the night Valor had appeared, and beyond that, of the fire that had taken her parents. But when she looked up, her eyes were clear and calm. "We were just remembering," she explained, "about how we found each other." Frank sat on the edge of her bed. "Seems like a lifetime ago now." She nodded, thoughtful. "Valor says we're going to be okay tomorrow." Frank smiled at the way she spoke for the dog, a habit that had evolved alongside her returning voice. "Does he now?" "Well, Valor's usually right about these things. He says Tyler Whitman can't hurt us anymore. Not really." She looked up at Frank, her expression suddenly vulnerable. "Do you think my parents would be proud of me for speaking up?" The question caught Frank off guard, a lump forming in his throat. "Oh, kiddo," he said softly, "they'd be more than proud. They'd be amazed by how brave you've been, how strong." Abby seemed to consider this, then nodded, satisfied. "That's what I thought too." She leaned against Valor, who remained steady beside her, his watchful eyes moving between the child and Frank as if following their conversation. "I'm going to tell the whole truth tomorrow, for them and for us." As the storm rumbled overhead, Frank was struck by the journey they had all taken, from broken, isolated individuals to this unlikely family forged through tragedy and healing. Whatever happened in the courtroom tomorrow, they would face it together. "Get some sleep, Abby," he said gently. "Tomorrow's a big day, but you won't be alone for a second of it." She nodded, giving Valor one last hug before climbing into bed. The German Shepherd settled on his customary spot on the floor beside her, his posture alert even in rest. Frank paused at the doorway, watching as Abby's breathing slowed into sleep, Valor's eyes still open, still vigilant. "Good job, soldier," he whispered to the dog. "Keep watching over her." Valor's ears twitched in acknowledgement, his steady gaze meeting Frank's for a moment of perfect understanding before returning to his silent vigil over the child who had found her voice because of him. The Oak Ridge County Courthouse stood in the town square, a stately brick building with white columns and wide stone steps that had witnessed over a century of the community's triumphs and tragedies. On the morning of Tyler Whitman's trial, those steps were crowded with reporters, curious onlookers, and a significant contingent of local residents wearing red bandanas tied around their wrists, a silent show of support for Abby and Valor. Frank had chosen to drive the long way around, using the less conspicuous rear entrance where Deputy Russell waited to escort them inside. Abby sat in the back seat with Valor, both of them unusually quiet. The German Shepherd wore his official service vest, newly emblazoned with both his military credentials and his therapy dog certification, a dual identity that reflected his unique journey. "Remember what we talked about?" Frank said gently as he parked. "You only have to tell the truth." "That's all anyone can ask of you." Abby nodded, her small hand buried in Valor's fur. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice held the slight tremor that appeared when she was nervous but determined. Collins, who had insisted on accompanying them as additional security, surveyed the courthouse with the practiced eye of someone who had assessed countless buildings for tactical advantages and vulnerabilities. "Looks secure," he confirmed. "Russell's got a good team in place." The deputy led them through a staff corridor, bypassing the main entrance where the media had gathered. Inside the courtroom, Catherine Benson, the lead prosecutor, waited near the witness preparation room. "Hello, Abby," she greeted warmly. "And this must be Valor. Thank you both for being here today." She knelt to the dog's level, allowing him to sniff her hand before she continued. "The judge has approved Valor's presence during your testimony. He'll be able to stay right beside you the whole time." Abby's shoulders relaxed slightly at this confirmation. "Will Mr. Whitman be there?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "Yes," Benson answered honestly. "He has the right to face his accusers, but he'll be sitting at the defense table, and you won't have to look at him if you don't want to. Just look at me, or at Frank, or focus on Valor." The prosecutor walked them through the procedure one more time, where Abby would sit, the order of questioning, what to expect from the defense attorney. Through it all, Valor remained pressed against Abby's leg, his alert presence a constant reassurance. "One more thing," Benson added as they prepared to enter the courtroom. "No matter what happens in there, what you're doing today is incredibly brave. Not many adults could do what you're about to do." Abby considered this, then looked down at Valor. "He makes me brave," she said simply. The courtroom fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning toward the small girl and her German Shepherd. Frank and Collins took seats in the front row behind the prosecution table, close enough for Abby to see them easily from the witness stand. Tyler Whitman sat at the defense table, dressed in an expensive suit that couldn't quite disguise how prison had already changed him. His confident posture was gone, replaced by a tense vigilance. When he spotted Abby, a flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or fear, crossed his face before his attorney murmured something that caused him to look away. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, called the court to order. The proceedings began with opening statements, the prosecutor laying out the case against Whitman in clear, damning terms: the financial motive, the documented pattern of intimidation, the physical evidence connecting him to the arson that killed the Sullivans. Throughout this recitation, Abby sat beside Frank, her eyes often closed as she leaned against Valor. Frank wondered if she was using the grounding techniques the trauma counselor had taught her, focusing on the feel of Valor's fur, the sound of his breathing, the solid presence of his body beside her. When it was finally time for Abby to testify, A court officer approached to escort her to the witness stand. Valor rose with her automatically, their movements synchronized through months of constant companionship. "The witness may be accompanied by her service animal," Judge Harmon announced, silencing a murmur from the defense table. "This court has reviewed and approved the certification and necessity documentation." Abby was sworn in, her small voice clear as she promised to tell the truth. Valor settled beside the witness chair, his body positioned protectively between Abby and the rest of the courtroom. Prosecutor Benson began gently, establishing Abby's background and the circumstances that had brought her to live with Frank after her parents' deaths. Then she moved to the critical question. "Abby, can you tell the court what you saw on the night of May 15th last year? The night of the fire?" A hush fell over the courtroom. Abby took a deep breath, her hand finding Valor's head as she began to speak. "I was supposed to be asleep, but I couldn't because it was hot that night. My window was open, and I heard a car outside." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I looked out and saw a black car with the Whitman Company logo on the door. A man got out. Not Mr. Whitman. Someone I didn't know. He went around to the back of our house carrying something." "What did you do then?" Benson prompted gently. "I went to tell my parents. Mom was still awake, working in her home office. When I told her what I saw, she looked scared. She called Dad, and then she called someone else, I think the police. She told them that someone from Whitman Development was at our house and that she had evidence about them trying to force people to sell their properties." Abby paused, her fingers tightening in Valor's fur. The dog responded instantly, pressing closer against her legs, his steady presence helping her continue. "Before anyone could come help us, we smelled smoke. Dad ran downstairs to check, and then he was shouting for us to get out. Mom grabbed me and we tried to go down the back stairs, but there were flames everywhere. Dad went first to try to clear a path, but then part of the ceiling fell." Her voice faltered for the first time. Valor rose slightly, placing his head directly in her lap. Abby took another deep breath, drew strength from his presence, and continued. "Mom told me to hide in my clubhouse in the backyard and not come out until the firefighters came. She said not to tell anyone what I saw because it wasn't safe. Then she went back to try to help Dad." Abby's voice grew very quiet. "That was the last time I saw her." The courtroom remained utterly silent as Abby described hiding in her backyard clubhouse, watching as her home burned, hearing the sirens too late to save her parents. She recounted how the firefighters found her, how she was taken to the hospital for smoke inhalation, and how she had stopped speaking that night. "Why did you stop talking, Abby?" Benson asked gently. "Because I promised Mom I wouldn't tell what I saw, and because—" She hesitated. "Because when I tried to talk, all I could hear were the sounds of the fire. It was safer to be quiet." "And what made you decide to speak again, almost a year later?" At this, Abby's expression softened as she looked down at Valor. "When Bryce Whitman kicked Valor at the fair, I couldn't be quiet anymore because someone I loved was being hurt, and being quiet wouldn't protect him." The defense attorney's cross-examination was careful and methodical, designed to introduce doubt without appearing to attack a sympathetic child witness. He questioned the reliability of Abby's memory, suggested that the trauma of the fire might have confused her perceptions, and implied that her identification of the Whitman Development car could have been a mistake. Through it all, Abby remained composed, her answers simple and consistent. When the attorney tried to suggest that she might have invented the story about seeing the car to give meaning to a tragic accident, her response was disarmingly direct. "I didn't make it up. I promised to tell the truth, and that's what I'm doing." The defense attorney, perhaps sensing he was doing more harm than good to his client's case, concluded his questioning relatively quickly. As Abby was excused from the witness stand, Judge Harmon did something unusual. She addressed the child directly. "Thank you for your testimony, Miss Sullivan. Your courage today is noted by this court." Frank was waiting as Abby and Valor returned to the gallery. He put an arm around her shoulders, feeling her exhaustion. "You did great, kiddo," he whispered. "Really great." The remainder of the day's proceedings passed in a blur of technical testimony, fire investigators explaining the evidence of arson, financial experts detailing Whitman's mounting debts and the timing of insurance policies, forensic accountants tracing the payment to the suspected arsonist. Through it all, Abby sat quietly between Frank and Collins, occasionally dozing against Frank's shoulder as the emotional toll of her testimony caught up with her. Valor remained vigilant at her feet, his attentive presence a constant comfort. When court adjourned for the day, Deputy Russell escorted them back to the private exit. "You've done your part," he assured Abby. "The rest is up to the jury now." The next 3 days of the trial proceeded without Abby's presence, Frank having decided that attending the full proceedings would be unnecessarily traumatic for her. Instead, they settled back into their routine at the farmhouse, with Collins continuing Valor's advanced training and Frank focusing on creating a sense of normalcy. On the afternoon of the 4th day, the call came from Prosecutor Benson. The jury had reached a verdict. "They're reading it tomorrow morning at 9, she informed Frank. "Abby doesn't need to be there, but you might want to be." Frank hesitated, torn between wanting to witness justice being served and not wanting to leave Abby, even with Collins there to protect her. "I think we should all go," came Abby's voice from the doorway. She stood there with Valor at her side, both of them watching Frank intently. "I need to see it end." After a thoughtful pause, Frank nodded. "All right. But we leave as soon as the verdict is read, no matter what it is." The next morning, they returned to the crowded courthouse. This time, Abby chose to enter through the front doors, Valor walking steadily beside her, Frank and Collins flanking them protectively. The crowd of reporters fell silent as they passed, a few cameras flashing, but most showing a restraint that surprised Frank. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. They found seats saved for them in the front row behind the prosecution table. Across the aisle, the gallery behind the defense was notably sparse. Tyler Whitman's fall from power had been so complete that few were willing to be publicly associated with him now. When the jury filed in, their expressions were somber. The foreman, a middle-aged woman who had listened intently throughout the trial, handed the verdict form to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Harmon. The judge read it silently, her face revealing nothing before she returned it to the bailiff. "Will the defendant please rise?" she instructed. Tyler Whitman stood, his attorney beside him. For the first time, he looked directly at Abby, his expression unreadable. "On the count of arson in the first degree, how do you find?" Judge Harmon asked the foreman. "We find the defendant guilty," came the clear response. "On the count of murder in the first degree in the death of Thomas Sullivan, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of murder in the first degree in the death of Eleanor Sullivan, how do you find?" "Guilty." The litany continued through the remaining counts: conspiracy, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and more. On each count, the verdict was the same: guilty. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the courtroom. Frank felt Abby lean against him, her small body trembling slightly. When he looked down, expecting to see tears, he was surprised to find her face composed, her eyes clear. "It's really over," she whispered. "Yes," Frank confirmed, pulling her close. "It really is." As Judge Harmon thanked the jury and set a date for sentencing, Tyler Whitman was led away in handcuffs. He paused briefly near their row, his eyes finding Abby's one last time. Something passed between them, not forgiveness, certainly, but perhaps a final acknowledgment of the truth that had brought them to this point. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had intensified with news of the verdict. Frank prepared to hustle Abby back to the car, but she surprised him by stopping at the top of the courthouse steps. "I want to say something," she told him quietly. "Just once, and then we can go home." Frank hesitated, protective instincts warring with respect for her agency. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her expression determined. "I'm sure." With a reluctant nod, Frank signaled to Collins and Deputy Russell, who positioned themselves on either side of Abby as reporters surged forward, microphones extended. Valor pressed against Abby's legs, his posture alert but calm. "Abigail, how do you feel about the verdict? Abby, will you be at the sentencing hearing? What's next for you and Valor?" The barrage of questions fell silent as Abby raised her small hand. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, carrying across the courthouse steps. "My parents always taught me to tell the truth, even when it's hard. Today, the truth won." She paused, her hand finding Valor's head beside her. "I stopped talking for a long time because I was afraid. But being silent doesn't make you safe. It just makes you silent. Valor taught me that sometimes you have to find your voice to protect what matters." She looked down at the German Shepherd, who gazed back at her with unwavering attention. "That's all I want to say. Thank you." With that, she turned and walked down the courthouse steps, Valor matching her pace perfectly, Frank and Collins following close behind. The reporters, for once, respected her wishes, holding back their questions as she passed. In the car, heading home, Abby leaned against the window, watching the familiar streets of Oak Ridge pass by. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Frank glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Well, there'll be some paperwork with the lawyers about your parents' estate and the insurance settlement. And we should probably think about whether you want to rebuild on your family's land or do something else with it." Abby shook her head slightly. "No, I mean with us. With you and me and Valor." "And Sergeant Collins?" she added, glancing at the soldier in the front passenger seat. Frank's heart tightened with emotion. "That's up to us to decide, kiddo. But as far as I'm concerned, you and Valor have a home with me for as long as you want it." "What about legally?" she pressed, surprising him with her practical thinking. "Am I still just staying with you, or—" The unspoken question hung in the air. Frank pulled the car over, turning to face her fully. "Abby, if you're asking what I think you're asking, if you want me to adopt you officially, then the answer is yes. Nothing would make me prouder." A smile broke across Abby's face, the kind of unguarded joy that had been rare since he'd known her. "Good," she said simply. "Because we belong together now. All of us." Her hand rested on Valor's head, and the German Shepherd leaned into her touch, his dark eyes moving between the humans in the car as if understanding the significance of the moment. Collins cleared his throat, clearly moved by the exchange. "You know," he said, "in the military we have a saying, family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you die for. Looks to me like you three found your family." As they continued the drive home, Frank found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, he had been a solitary man, haunted by his own losses, unable to move forward. Abby had been a traumatized child, locked in silence by grief and fear. Valor had been a military dog separated from his handler, his training and loyalty without purpose. Now, against all odds, they had become something new together, healing each other's wounds, filling each other's empty spaces, creating a family from the broken pieces of their individual lives. When they arrived at the farmhouse, Mrs. Kellerman was waiting on the porch with a homemade apple pie and news that the entire community was organizing a celebration for the weekend, not just for the verdict, but for Abby's courage and Valor's devotion. "This town remembers its heroes," she told Abby, patting her cheek affectionately. "And what you did, standing up to that man, telling your truth. That's what heroes do." Abby accepted the compliment with her usual quiet grace, but later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Georgia sky in shades of pink and gold, she returned to the idea. "I don't feel like a hero," she confided to Frank. "I was just trying to keep a promise to my mom and then to protect Valor." Frank smiled, understanding completely. "That's usually how it works. Real heroes don't set out to be heroic. They just do what needs doing when it needs to be done." Abby considered this, absently stroking Valor's fur as the dog dozed beside her. "Then Valor's the biggest hero of all. He always does exactly what needs doing." As if hearing his name in sleep, the German shepherd's tail thumped once against the porch boards, making them both smile. "You know," Frank said after a comfortable silence, "we should think about what you want to do with your parents' land. It's yours now to decide." Abby was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "I've been thinking about that," she finally said. "What if we built a place for dogs like Valor? Dogs who need homes and kids who need dogs. We could call it Sullivan's Voice." The idea caught Frank by surprise, not just its practicality, but the way it transformed a place of tragedy into something healing and hopeful. That's a wonderful idea, Abby." She nodded, warming to the concept. "Sergeant Collins could help train the dogs, and I could tell the kids that being quiet doesn't mean being broken. That finding your voice takes time sometimes. I think your parents would be mighty proud of that idea," Frank told her, his voice rough with emotion. As darkness settled over the farmhouse, bringing with it the chorus of crickets and the first fireflies of evening, Frank watched Abby lean against Valor's sleeping form, her eyes heavy with the emotional exhaustion of the day. In that peaceful moment, he allowed himself to believe fully, for the first time, that they had emerged from the darkness, not unchanged, certainly, but whole in a new way. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be nightmares, therapy sessions, questions without easy answers. Abby's trauma wouldn't disappear with Whitman's conviction, and the bonds between their unlikely family would require nurturing and care. But they had found each other against impossible odds, and in doing so had discovered a truth as old as time itself, that love, in its many forms, remains the most powerful healing force in the world. As Abby finally dozed off against Valor's warm side, Frank gently lifted her to carry her inside. The German shepherd rose immediately, following them into the house with the vigilant devotion that had become as natural as breathing. "Good dog," Frank whispered as he laid Abby in her bed. "Good dog." Valor settled on the floor beside her, his head resting on his paws but his eyes alert, standing guard as he had since the night he'd appeared on their porch. Frank paused in the doorway, watching them both, the child who had found her voice and the dog who had given it back to her. Some might call it coincidence, the crossing of their paths at the precise moment each needed the other most. Others might call it destiny or divine intervention. Frank didn't have a name for it, but he recognized the precious gift they had been given, the chance to heal together, to build something new from the ashes of loss, to find family in the most unexpected places. And in the end, perhaps that was all any of us could hope to do, to notice when someone needs help, to find the courage to speak when silence would be easier, and to stand guard over the ones we love, no matter what storms may come. They say life's most beautiful chapters often begin after its darkest moments. Abby's journey from silence to strength reminds us that it's never too late to find our voice, especially when protecting those we love. Like Valor, who stood guard through the night, true loyalty doesn't waver when storms come. It only grows stronger. Many of us have weathered our own fires, lost loved ones, faced betrayals, or simply felt the world changing too fast around us. Yet Abby's story shows us that family isn't always who we're born to. Sometimes it's who finds us when we need them most. Remember Frank's wisdom? Real heroes don't set out to be heroic. They just do what needs doing when it needs to be done. Perhaps that's the gift of our generation, knowing that our quiet acts of courage, our everyday stands for what's right, still matter deeply in this world. Has there been a valor in your life, someone or something that helped you find your voice when you needed it most? Or like Frank, have you ever been the steady presence that helped someone else heal? Share your story below, because every time we speak our truth, we help someone else find the courage to break their silence.